people were mistreated so badly that they're not going to want to stay. And if the military says, if President Biden says that he cares about military members and veterans, then why were we treated like dirt? Why was I kicked out? No benefits. Why was I told that I was less than honorable? I had no character, that I was all the other words I can't say on this.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Feds, a production of Feds for Freedom, where we seek to make integrity a normal characteristic inside the government. On this podcast, you get a unique perspective from the American citizens we interview, probably because most work directly under the policymakers. Go ahead and follow us so you can be alerted to all the latest episodes. Visit our website, sign up for our newsletters, and become a member at fedsforfreedom.org.
Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Two of our past guests, John Frankman and Briana Cespedes, join us in person today. John is a former captain in the Army and Green Beret who was, along with his men, told to wear red armbands to signal that they were unvaccinated. He left the Army because of the COVID vaccine mandate. Briana is a former Air Force broadcast journalist, and she was put in quarantine for over 140 days in total, being reprimanded for not following what they maintained was a lawful order, and ultimately receiving a dishonorable discharge. She founded Involuntary Veterans, through which she seeks to bring awareness to the truth that this can happen again as accountability is still in process. Briana and John seek to support others who were pushed out of the military service by forming legislation that will reform our broken bureaucracy. Thank you so much for coming in today. It's great to finally meet you all in person. Okay, so you all are here for the National Defense Authorization Act 2025 week, in which the legislators are voting on amendments to put into this act. So tell us about it and what you're advocating for.
Specifically, we came here last year for the first time, and we were trying to influence for the NDAA, right? Like you said, the National Defense Authorization Act. We're trying to influence amendments because that's one of the quickest ways that we can get change in, right? So, for example, everyone that was discharged from the military for not getting the COVID shot, they could easily put an amendment in that would automatically upgrade all the discharge statuses from general, from a less than honorable to an honorable status, such as mine, right? So that's an avenue. Amendments are a great way to get change done quickly. We also do have other lines of effort that we're doing. It's not just the amendments. We're going through, judicial. We also have influence when it comes to also the awareness element. And we're trying to get candidates as well into Congress. So there's different ways, but this is one way that we're trying to make change in the DoD as a whole.
Mm-hmm. So is it even a thing to actually sway legislators? Do they actually do what we ask them to do anymore?
Most of the time, no. And it's definitely a frustration. And that's where I think that there's different phases to this right now. And unfortunately, if it's not a very pressing issue publicly for the politicians, they're often not likely to do it, especially given, I think, the large influence we've seen from lobbyists and big pharma who want to continue and think that the COVID shot was fine, didn't hurt anyone, and that this was a lawful order. So it's absolutely worth it and necessary in order to stay on top of our politicians, to pressure them to make sure that they know they raise awareness. But I think that we need to, one, raise that awareness, work with certain ones who will help us raise the awareness. That way we can get the reparations for service members and the accountability. And I would say that with some of the people we've been talking to, there has been some progress, which I'm very happy about.
Who have been the politicians that have been helping you all?
So Representative Matt Gaetz has been extremely helpful, and he invited me as his guest to the State of the Union this last March. And he did so not just to invite me, but kind of on behalf of all veterans who have been negatively impacted because of the COVID shot mandate. So he's been helpful, and he's trying to put in an amendment to give back pay and bring back service members who were discharged for the vax mandate. You also have Thomas Massey, who I reached out to back in 2021, and he was fantastic. He read the tea leaves like I think no other politician had during the time of COVID, even going against the CARES Act. But he put in legislation that service members will not be mandated to take the shot. And that was early 2021 before the mandate ever went out. So those two on the House side have been excellent. Representative Corey Mills has discussed what's happened to military members, and he did so during a hearing that I was able to attend on the day of the SO2 on March 7th. And also Senator Ron Johnson. He's been fantastic. He had a roundtable on COVID injuries, and he's worked with a number of different military whistleblowers. So these folks are helping to raise awareness. They're putting in good kind of amendments and ideas, but it's just trying to get enough of their colleagues to either fall in line and support them or to find people to primary them out.
And honestly, even last year, Rep. Eli Crane, he as well helped us to get a meeting together with over 11 offices in order to begin this discussion. And that was the first time that we had met quite a few of these staffers. And now, last year, we were asking for a regional hearing. We were asking for just the information to be getting out, like the awareness in Congress itself. And we have seen a hearing, like John said, March 7th. That was for the DoD monitoring of COVID with the House Armed Services Committee, as well as a roundtable Senator Johnson put ahead as well. So there is some movement in that sense. It's not, of course, immediate like we wanted, like an amendment within the NDAA. But I just looked yesterday because on the House side, they voted in a few amendments, and there are 9 right now that have to do with COVID and the military, specifically helping involuntarily discharged members try to get upgrades or be reinstated. So we are here honestly talking about, hey, we have the stories. We've been through it. We have the testimonies. We have the data. And also we have proposed amendments as well. So that's why we're here, and we're meeting with them. We're creating relationships. And we're going to keep coming back until we see something actually in the change. Because involuntarily discharged, okay, that covers a lot of members, but it doesn't cover people like John, that he was literally in a situation where nothing was benefiting him to stay. So he went through so much coercion as well. And the ultimate, you're almost in a way forced out without being forced out, right? So that's why we come here physically to keep that up.
Going back to those hearings, there have been a good slew of them when it comes to the COVID. And we've got Morenz, the chief advisor to Fauci himself, and Peter Daszak. There's been a whole slew of them lately, but I think to myself, will actually anything be done about it? Will these people actually be held accountable? And fortunately, on the military side, like you said, involuntarily pushed out veterans will hopefully have some good things coming to them.
Right. And I mean, unfortunately, with the involuntarily or the discharged ones, that covers about 8,600 service members. We saw a drop in numbers in the military of 60,000 total man strength between September of 21, when the mandate came out, and September of 22. And that's a huge number. And talking to folks in the Dale Saran lawsuit who are working on that, they estimate that maybe we lost 100,000 people between reserves, guard, active duty. And a lot of people who they left before they were actually discharged. Like I left not being discharged because if I tried to wait around, I might have gotten a general discharge like Briana did. So even if there is some legislation in the NDAA, we're not necessarily sure it's going to go far enough, and that's what we're going to keep pushing for. And right, yeah, you were bringing up the hearings, and there are some on Fauci, some on Morenz, but specifically for the military, we have not seen as many that have covered what's happened. And I think a lot of people are talking about DEI right now and that affecting readiness. Well, I would argue that what affects readiness a lot more than just DEI is actually the shot mandate, because there were 8,600 kicked out, the 60,000 who left. I don't know how many trainees there are in the military, but I'd venture to guess not that many. So I think that's the bigger readiness issue.
You mentioned in our previous interview with you that you did have experience with a transgender service member, but it was one within hundreds, thousands of people that you interacted with. But this is a much larger issue.
Yes, I think so.
And honestly, I mean, since the COVID mandate, right, we've seen recruitment numbers really suffering. We've seen retention numbers. I mean, I know personally, I'm not willing to join the military right now again because there's nothing stopping the Secretary of Defense from doing this all over again. I know generations of families that have been in the military for 5 generations. Now they're telling their kids and their friends, don't join. So there is a huge issue in the military, morally speaking. I mean, if you think about just the effects of being put into quarantine and isolation like I was for that amount of time, over 140 days, what is that doing? What is that saying about, hey, this is how we treat our members when you are deciding to voluntarily serve? I do not want to be put in that circumstance again where I can be literally told to be in a prison sort of circumstance, right? So I think that it's really sad to see that the priorities are, they're not where they should be. Where we're really suffering, that's not where we are seeing the priority. So, yeah.
John, do you think that the DEI topic, so that's diversity, equity, inclusion, and the nature of it forces people to think about absolute truth? Because it's so foundational. Okay? So it makes people think about absolute truth. And will thinking about absolute truth in this capacity eventually lead them back to how untruthful the COVID narratives were and still are? We're still being fed the same stuff. So do you think it will cause people to rethink COVID?
It will. I think that the more people try to associate everything with science, including that men are women or women are men, I think that when those people are the ones that are proclaiming this is science, and they're also the ones that are scientifically proclaiming that COVID was the deadliest disease that ever existed, and that the COVID shot works with 100% efficacy and then 90 and 80 and 70 or whatever, that it will force people to see that, well, this is such an absurdity and just on its face is just a lie. It goes against the principle of non-contradiction, which is so foundational. And that just going from them saying that to other issues, that, yeah, they're going to stop believing these people. And the light is going to be a lot more obvious within the darkness and the chaos.
It's interesting because usually I am the far more positive person, but honestly, I would disagree. I would say that it's a distraction. And we do find that during COVID in the military, specifically speaking, the military, a lot of people with values were weeded out, right? So I think there's a lot of weeding out that is happening, which could highlight the differences, morally speaking, in absolute. However, I do see it as an overall weakening, and that people are just getting distracted with more and more layers. So that's my opinion.
I'm thinking about this. I think the indoctrination is so deep, and I hate to say that word, indoctrination, but it's true. It has happened. The indoctrination is so deep that I just don't see this changing, but it could. I think it is a very interesting thing, going back to talking about DEI and transgender, especially the transgender topic. The Miss Maryland contestant that won is a biological man. And
so unfair to those ladies. I would hate to be in that contest. Like, dang, I'm ugly, man.
Well, I think the plainest woman in the United States has more right to winning that competition than that person did, because everything on them is fake. It's not real. It's absolutely astonishing to me that nobody that I have seen from that contestant pool actually stood up and said, no, we're not going to take this. Like, where's the Riley Gaines of the beauty pageants?
Yeah, you need one for everything that happens. I mean, during COVID, right, there was so much pressure. You were a bad guy if you didn't get vaccinated. I remember going around, and it was like I was a diseased person with like leprosy, right, in the Bible, because they would not associate with me. I was at lunch one time with my coworkers, and I had my mask off because I was eating, right, and my master sergeant walks in the room and she says, "Hey, you can't be in here with us. You have to leave." Just because I wasn't vaccinated, right? So there's a pressure and honestly a lot of coercion. It's really hard to be the one person that doesn't go along. It's really, really hard.
Well, on that note, since you all were on the podcast last year, you all have signed the Declaration of Military Accountability. And has it continued? We are well aware of what it states here on the podcast. Has it continued to gain traction, and particularly at the high levels of military officials and the politicians that need to hear it?
I don't think it's gained enough traction, not as much as we would have hoped. And being at the State of the Union as Rep. Matt Gaetz' guest, it was an opportunity to talk about it, and it's something that he acknowledged. And I believe it was submitted in the record at a different hearing as well. But it's not something that politicians are regularly talking about or touting. So I don't think it's really gotten that kind of traction. We've had 35,000 people sign the petition, but that's not nearly enough.
What do you make of that only 35,000 have signed it? I checked the numbers yesterday. I would expect millions. There are millions of us who did say something, who did at least say, I'm not going to have that experimental treatment put into my body. So why aren't those, how is this not getting to them, or why are they not signing?
Well, I think that we've kind of experienced some issues with the website, and part of that, there's question, is that a web attack or something of that nature that's slowing down the traffic or making it harder for people to actually sign. So that's something that we're not sure about. There's also kind of an apathy, and my bigger concern, and I know large issues are the border, the economy, the threat of World War III. I think a larger issue that we need to be discussing is totalitarianism within the country. And it's because everyone is just falling asleep at the wheel right now. We don't remember that the last 3 years with COVID, that it was the biggest infringement upon our personal liberties, the COVID prevention policies. So we have all of these different totalitarian kind of entities or tools that are being put in place to limit our freedoms, but we don't want to go to that uncomfortable place, face what happened beforehand. And that's why I think that maybe it's people just trying to move on, even a lot of people in the military just wanting to move on.
Is it just fear that is causing the society to just allow these totalitarian thoughts to continue and these actions to continue? Is this fear?
More than 1984, I think it's a brave new world. I think that's more of the direction we're going, where people are just kind of out of pleasure, out of just convenience. Oh, let me give all of my data to whatever website, whatever app. Let me just kind of continue to go along to get along. Great, no one's getting kicked out anymore. You know, I brought up when I was in the military, whenever we had the group commander, he'd have regular hearings with different ranks. So he'll have the captains and the majors in, he'll have town halls. And I think the 2 town halls after I got removed from my team because of the COVID shot, I brought up the COVID mandate, it being a problem, and talked to him afterwards. And he's like, yeah, I just kind of want to move on past that. It's like, well, we just can't move on past that. You just broke the law.
Could you say really clearly why we cannot move past that?
It will happen again. That's the biggest thing, is that what happened was wrong. The people who did the wrong, did the evil, feel emboldened that they can do it again. They gained and benefited from it in such an extent. And that's not just the military, with people who were able to climb rank by getting the shots. You were actually seen as a good leader if you had a larger percentage of people vaccinated. And it was literally just trying to make PowerPoint boxes green instead of yellow or red based on the numbers you had. So these people were able to benefit, but not just them, also Big Pharma, also the lobbyists supporting Big Pharma, also DoD leaders who were then being paid or paying for those shots. And you also have these larger corporations too, where when you shut every business down, when you stop the free market economy and these middle class people who have businesses that it shuts down, well, now you're making a larger wealth gap, and you're making it where these larger corporations are the only ones that are able to continue existing. So it has fundamentally changed. And we see how much housing prices are. I'm so concerned about what people are able to afford. And a lot of people aren't looking at the debt. It's $34 trillion plus. That means that every individual, man, woman, and child owes $100,000, like $102,000. That's absolute insanity. We are just on the verge of just societal collapse, and no one's looking at it. So that's where we really need to move forward, because we could very easily collapse into a totalitarian state.
And that's why I signed the DMA. There's a philosopher, his name is Title or Tittle. I don't know how to say his name. I think it's Title. He talks about the circle of democracy and basically how it will fall. And one of the steps that right before democracy falls is apathy. And that's what we've seen a lot. I know that in my generation, I would say that there's definitely an apathetic response to a lot that happened. However, COVID, I do believe COVID woke people up. I mean, it woke people up to where now we have the DMA. I mean, we did write that document, and I felt so honored to be able to sign that document, because when I was reading it, I read it to my family, and I sounded like a founding father, right, when I was reading it. It's just beautiful leather. Rob Green did a good job writing that. So it was just a beautiful letter, and beautiful to be a part of the movement. We're not apathetic, and we're trying to wake people up. I think COVID did cause my generation to think about the next generation. And that's where I do have some hope. I wish that we could see a lot more coming in practically, of course. We do have, one of our practical things that we're doing is candidates. So people that signed on to this letter are running now. We have, there's 4 or 5? 4.
There's 4.
4 right now. So Cameron Hamilton, we have Mara Macy, we have Chris Cullum, and Jay Furman, right? So those are candidates that have signed on, and they are going to, when they get in Congress, Lord willing, they're going to be applying these principles in the DMA. So it's a slow roll game. It's a really slow roll game. It's been recognized. I mean, the DMA was on Tucker Carlson. I think Brad Miller talked about it. It's been around, but yeah, it's interesting, because I will look to this as a long-term movement, and I think that's what we have to be willing to do.
You talk about apathy. I think to myself, I was apathetic for a long time. I always loved politics until I realized this is a game and I'm really tired of it. And I just did my thing, got my master's, and didn't really pay attention for some time, because I thought, I am not affected by this, right? And then I had children, and then COVID happened, and I was realizing there's a vaccine injury in our family. And so I was tackling that. And then COVID, I remember crying to my parents-in-law on the phone saying, I will never trust the US government ever again. And I laugh now thinking, I trusted them? How could I have ever done that? And no one should. No one should be in that position. Everyone needs to be on their tiptoes, walking around like really careful where they step, and watching the government at all times. Oh, this is, yeah. So how far is apathy from totalitarian? I can't say it. Totalitarianism.
It's 2 steps. It's basically apathy, and then the people realize that they can vote in money to themselves, and once that happens, that's when totalitarianism comes over.
Votes in money.
To themselves. So the people can vote in the government, which will fund them, right? And
aren't we already there?
Well, yeah. So it depends on which step. I mean,
It's
we
the
can
welfare
debate.
state, yeah.
We can debate which state we're at right now, but yeah,
Totally, we're there.
If you look at the percentage of federal
The debate's
spending
over.
right now,
I mean,
yes.
I think so. I think it was Del Bigtree on the Highwire that said, we're going there. It's going to come. We just want to slow it down. So let's just slow it down.
yeah. I mean, the prediction was about 200 years, so we've lasted longer than that.
Yeah. Wait, John, do you think we can stop totalitarian? I can't ever say it. Totalitarianism. Sorry.
It's possible, but not necessarily probable. And unfortunately, it's really sad to say things might need to get worse before they get better, because even I think in 2022, I was looking at how many people voted in that election. It was maybe like 40-something percent, 45%. And it's just, if you have that level of people that are actually voting, and these aren't necessarily very high informed voters, then how can you say you deserve a democratic republic, right? So I think that a lot of people are still comfortable, and it's tough for the left, just their policies are religion. I know that they tried to say that religious people go based on religion, or that religion blinds us to reason. I think that the argument is pretty much one, that getting rid of religion and making your religion modernism, leftism, that gets rid of common sense, where men can be women, women can be men, and you can just kill a child up until the point of birth. That at any rate, it's going to be very difficult to try to save it. It's going to take people to whatever they're doing, they need to do more. And it's not just going to be a political thing. It needs to be a political and spiritual renewal of this country. and people need God. And I think that my favorite theologian is St. Thomas Aquinas. I wrote my master's thesis largely based on his writings, but he'll talk about where do you need faith to know reason? Well, there's some things that you can just know through reason, through just the natural law. But often our intellects are so darkened, our will is so darkened that we're not able to come to those conclusions ourselves, that we do need the light of faith to help guide us, to help bring us there. I think that's exactly what's going on with this country, is that we've lost Jesus Christ, that we're turning and abandoning ourselves to him. We're given into our sins. Sin darkens the intellect. Another definition for sin is an act against reason. And you habituate yourself to that. You habituate yourself to that kind of darkened intellect, to that wrong thinking, and to just that kind of level of hedonism where you just want what's easy instead of what's tough and virtuous. So we need, I think, a spiritual renewal just as much as political. And that's where the two really need to marry. I think we're both part of different, very conservative Christian movements. I'm Catholic, she's Protestant. But a lot of them have given up on trying to get involved politically. But then you have a lot of people who are very politically involved, but they might not be religiously involved. I'm thinking maybe like an AmFest or something like that. But we need to get both parties together and people very invigorated to fight for this temporal state in order to create an environment that allows for human flourishing and is more receptive to the grace of Christ.
And coming from Cuba, I was just there actually in April, and seeing what liberalism, ultimately the left, leads to is a more communist type of ideology. So communism is not just a form of government, it is actually philosophy itself. It's raising the government to the level of God in that sense. And that's when people in Cuba, you see the people literally living without hope in their eyes. I mean, I just remember looking at them and there's just like a dead inside of their eyes. So there's something about without God, right? There's no life, that life, that being, that goodness that John is talking about. And we cannot come to a point where the government becomes our God. And it's really, really powerful for me just because I was just there in Cuba and seeing that. So all the way going the other direction and talking about the Lord and keeping these principles is very important, that we expose the darkness and we go towards the injustice when it's coming our way. I mean, Proverbs talks about speak up for those that are voiceless. And a lot of people that were in the military, they were in circumstances where I wish they would have spoken up, but they had families, they had other pressures on them. They didn't have the means. I did have the means. So I was going to stand up for the other people because I knew that I could go home. I would still have a family. I would be okay. I think we're getting to the point now where people have to be willing to sacrifice, not just their convenience, but even now it's a matter of, hey, the family now we have to sacrifice. It's going to be really difficult because it's becoming more of a wartime mentality these days. So I'm really praying for the next generation. Now we have to break it before my children come into this world because I don't want them to go through this.
Yeah, it's interesting. With our faith, we cannot be kind of a country club faith in that mentality. It's easy to get there and be comfortable. You're reading your scriptures, you're saying it, and yet are you living it? And when you're living it, things get very hard. Right now, it's hard. So, yeah, no more country club. Like you said, wartime mentality.
Not even just like community. Like we can take it down to a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we see, it's so fresh on my mind. I have seen where that leads. I mean, look at Cuba. Go to Cuba. It's not just an old museum. It's a destroyed place. It's a deserted island. People are leaving by the hundreds of thousands over there. It's completely deserted. So we already know what that ideology leads to. We have examples. Why are we going the same direction? We need to be going the opposite.
These are excellent words. Yeah, this is good. You both interact with veterans, voluntary and involuntary veterans. You know a lot of promises that have been made, especially within Veterans Affairs. But what are the biggest gaps that you are seeing for veterans, both voluntary and involuntary? And how do we fix that? What do we do?
Well, you talked to Sonny Fleeman, and he had some amazing recommendations about linking COVID vaccine injuries to the PACT Act. And I think that would be just a fantastic thing.
the toxic exposure, risk activity, and
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to work right now on that element with potentially connecting, right? That service connection so people can get paid for their vaccine injuries. I mean, Carolina Stansick, I struggle with her name. She just got a pacemaker in last week. I mean, she is 24 years old, perfectly healthy, and now she's going through this, right? So there should definitely be service connection. And I did see an amendment with the House for the NDAA that they are trying to push that forward. So that's good news. Will it go in? I'm not sure. But there is thoughts about getting this through to give that service connection. As well as something service connection another thing that we are potentially going to move forward with is the mental health effects. I mean, people have been mistreated like crazy.
Let me ask before we go there, because I want to get to that.
Yeah.
What do you mean by service connection?
Yeah, so service connection is essentially if you were in the military and you were injured in the military, it could be physical, it could be mental, then you would be getting paid from the VA for that disability that you're given.
So let's talk about the mental health effects.
Yes. So mental health effects, I mean, this is more of a VA question and it's a long term. But for example, right, me being in isolation quarantine, that itself has caused for me at times, I mean, I have nightmares. If there's a room that's enclosed, sometimes I got to open the door just to feel like I can get out, things like that. And my story is not as extreme as some other people. So what potentially in the future, if the mental health effects could be connected with service connection, or we can just speak about the ultimate retention issues, right? People were mistreated so badly that they're not going to want to stay. And if the military says, if President Biden says that he cares about military members and veterans, then why were we treated like dirt? Why was I kicked out? No benefits. Why was I told that I was less than honorable? I had no character, that I was all the other words I can't say on this. Why is that the case? So many members have been just completely excommunicated. They're not a part of these veteran service organizations that are supposed to support and help because they don't have an honorable discharge. So the mental health effects go very large, and it's a real thing that politicians say they care about, but they've forgotten about quite a large number of service members.
So Briana, you have some exciting news to share about your dishonorable discharge status.
Yes. So I love to share good news because we don't get a lot. So
well, hey, it's a beautiful day. That's really good news.
It is. So I was able to apply through the Board of Corrections for a upgrade to my discharge status. And I recently got back response that I now have an honorable, which is great news. That means I have the GI Bill, I have the benefits again. And now as a 25-year-old, I can consider going to school. Actually, I want to go to law school, and that will be covered, right? So the good news is that the DoD is starting to backtrack in the sense of the people that they kicked out and gave less than honorables, they're now starting to give it. The Air Force is the first one. They gave over 30 within 3 months' time, and that was last year. So they're starting to slowly go. And then the Air Force is the first branch usually, and then you have the other branches follow suit.
Can you talk a little bit about the process? What did you have to give? Like what material did you have to give?
That's great you asked that. So I created a template based off of what I did to help other involuntary veterans as well. So if you know any veteran that was discharged for this issue, I have just recommendations of what they could do. They can just go to Involuntary Veterans on Instagram. It's there and they can access that. So basically what you do is you just apply through they have like a template that you follow and you have to fill out this paperwork. And then there's so much information now out there with other people getting their upgrades that they're starting to easily give them. So you just have to say, hey, I was discharged because I didn't get the COVID vaccine. I submitted a religious exemption, and they will most likely upgrade.
It's a little bit disgusting that they gave you a honorable discharge for your refusal for the shot, and everything that stemmed from that. And then you have to go back to them and ask for an honorable discharge.
So, yeah, they had told me when I was in the process of getting kicked out, they told me you're going to get a dishonorable, you're going to get a dishonorable. So there's different levels. There's a dishonorable, which is like you're a felon. There's a general discharge, which is like you messed up, you smoked weed. One person I knew, she was assaulted and that guy got a general discharge. So it's not, and you lose your benefits as well. And then there's the honorable status. So I was given the general. And yeah, I mean, I lost everything, right? And I did the honorable service. However, it was not deemed as honorable because I refused that order, which was not lawful. And it's sad because so many people did lose so much, and they still have, because a lot of them still do not have that upgrade. And that's why we want it as an amendment, because then it would just sweep through and fix that for everybody.
This is where Congress has really failed, and there needs to be a lot more outrage from everyone right now. I mean, it's just insane. We had 8,600 who were kicked out, like Briana, who probably got general discharges. You had people who were pressured, so getting near the 100,000 leaving because of that. And when you asked, has Congress been helping us? Basically, no. If you had to do yes or no, no. And that's based on the NDAAs that have gone through. And since the mandate was rescinded for the NDAA of 2023, we haven't had it where there was an automatic upgrade of discharge status to honorable. The Army, they sent a letter out last, I believe it was October, November, inviting service members back in. There was no policy change to that letter. The military, the DoD, doesn't even need Congress to tell them how they need to do that. They can just go ahead and say, hey, mandate's gone. Let's go ahead and bring everybody back in automatically. Let's do that ourselves. Let's raise their discharge status. The DoD has failed. Our DoD leaders have failed us in that. Congress as well. They have failed us in it. This has been the second year that we've tried to say, bring service members back in automatically who've been kicked out, automatically raise discharge statuses for people who've been kicked out. And that's something that working and talking with reps last year before they voted it in, talking to Rep Gates, Rep Crane, and they noted that that's just a failure on the part of just HASC, and they just, kind of need better players up there, or it's infuriating.
And it's outrageous too. I mean, some people, they got bonuses when they re-enlisted, right? And then once they got kicked out, they had to pay back those bonuses. There's just so many stories of people that have been completely screwed by this. And ultimately, the DoD is just getting away with it. That's why we're here.
Yeah. And my question is there a greater agenda or reason that they are not actually going to follow through and actually put these honorable discharges in, or to help you in any capacity to bring back people?
Yes, there is a greater agenda, that they don't want conservatives who think freely and are critically thinking in the military or any sector of society. And this isn't just the military. We saw during COVID that anyone who was critically thinking, didn't want to get the jab, had religious concerns, whatever, they were tried, that every institution, and it was a lot of unelected bureaucrats and different agencies that were making up rules, making up laws that people had to follow that made lives as difficult as possible for the common citizen. And we're seeing that in the policies that are being put in place or not put in place with the military as far as bringing people back in. We're seeing that with DEI as well. DEI right now, to me, seems as though it's something that you tip your hat to, or that you acknowledge in order to say, hey, I'm a company guy. I'm going along with what you're telling me to go along with. Please benefit me right now. This is your new competence hierarchy, is actually just how much you're conforming yourself to this false ideology.
Or you're labeled a bigot if you don't go along with it.
And the DoD never says sorry, ever.
Except for the generals, when Senator Tommy Tuberville was holding up the promotions of generals because they were paying for people. So you can't pay for us to come back in or anything like that, but you can pay for service members to travel out of state to get abortions, because they were making a big political statement of that. Tommy Tuberville was holding off promoting generals. And then you had Senator Lindsey Graham get all pissed off about it and, getting angry at Tommy Tuberville. Well, Senator Lindsey Graham never got pissed off about us getting kicked out of the military. I didn't hear him talk about that at all. But going ahead with these generals. Now, these generals, when they got their promotions, they got back pay from all the money that they didn't get from the delayed promotion. Unlike us, who haven't gotten back pay for what is an illegal order, which violated religious freedoms as well and left many vax injured. So it's a complete double standard based on whether you're in the elite and going along with the official narrative and company line, or if you're a critical thinker who loves this country, loves the Constitution, and is willing to fight and sacrifice for it.
So you all, after this interview, are going to be going to the Hill to talk with some people. And what will your talking points be?
Yes, our main talking points are talking mostly establishing relationship and also for the NDAA amendments. We're asking, hey, what amendments are you guys looking at? Are you thinking about this specific group of veterans? And then we have specific talking points that we have come together as a group to talk about. So that obviously upgrading discharge statuses, reinstating service members that have been separated, providing back pay to those discharged, investigating the health effects of the COVID shot and providing for care for those who have been injured. That's a huge one. And then making sure also to forbid future mandates. That's something that a lot of people, I think, are forgetting, or just simply what is stopping a lot of people from going back in, such as myself. There's nothing that's stopping the Secretary of Defense from doing this again, right? So that either a forbidding of or just looking back at the actual law and making sure that this should have congressional approval or something in order to require this.
They broke the law. So
yes,
I don't even think that putting a new law in is. So I would say that it's holding people accountable for the laws that are already on the books is the biggest thing. And that's where the Declaration of Military Accountability comes in. So just being very realistic, probably not going to get the wins that we want right now, not with this current regime. We're going to have to wait until we have more military-friendly congressmen in the House, Senate, in the executive branch as well. But when they get that, they need to implement those things that we're calling for within the Declaration of Military Accountability. That is calling back off of retirement those generals that put in this unlawful order, just subjecting them to court-martial. And this isn't a malevolent thing. This is putting them and having them go up against the laws that were already on the books. If they didn't do anything wrong, fine. But they did, so they need to be held accountable for that. And that's also members of Congress being willing to zero out retirement pay for these flag officers who violated the law in such an extent, and also not allow them to serve under senior executive service, or else their kind of company mindset will continue to infect the government for a longer period of time.
Our leadership needs to be held accountable because they have forgotten what they swore to. They forgot that they have sworn to the Constitution, and that's what we've remembered. So someone like me, a junior enlisted E4 at the time, I had to keep to my oath more than my commander, who told me when he was kicking me out, he said, "I wish I could keep you. You're a great asset to the Air Force, but my hands are tied." If his hands are tied, we need leaders that are willing to lose their jobs for the sake of what they swear to. So that's something huge, constitutional, remembering what we do.
Yes. So I was going to bring this up. In your talks with politicians, are you able to look into their eyes and say, remember what happened with anthrax, the anthrax shots? This happened with COVID as well. What makes you think this isn't going to happen again? And we're that close to totalitarianism. Look, I said it this time. How does that make you feel? Do you want that to happen? Can you do something within your particular position to do something about it? Have you asked these people to remember and to think where we are as a country?
That's a great question. And I think for a lot of them, it's not the hot topic of the day right now, that we've just moved on, that, the mandate was rescinded. And that's what happened with the judicial system too, is when the mandate was rescinded, we had over 40 lawsuits against Lloyd Austin, against the DOD, but those were dismissed as moot. But we needed that legal precedent to be set in there so this doesn't happen again. So I definitely, since coming up here, don't necessarily have as much respect for politicians as I thought I might have at first. There are some that I absolutely, think are fantastic, want to continue to work with them, support them to the extent that I can. But for a large swath, it's like, why hasn't this gotten fixed? I just don't know. Even with the hearing with Fauci recently, we just treated him with kitty gloves. This is not him specifically, but just everyone underneath him subjected us to just the greatest limitations of our freedoms within our lifetime. And if he had his way, if there was no other pushback, we'd be in a far, far worse state now. And there's no acknowledgement of it and no kind of concern about how do we keep ourselves a free country.
Yeah, that hearing, and I encourage all of our listeners to go and watch that hearing. I'll provide some links below. It seemed rigged to me. Even the seeming freedom fighters in there were just wasting their opportunity to really hit him with the hard questions.
Right.
Any thoughts on that, John?
I completely agree. And if we're not talking about the millions of lives that were probably lost because of Anthony Fauci and his policies, that you're having the CDC, the WHO talk about how dangerous COVID is, you are actually silencing people who are providing treatments that are working well for early prevention. There was no early prevention whatsoever. So that was an opportunity to save however many millions of lives. Then you are slandering ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, drugs that I think one of them had gotten a Nobel Prize for, saying it's not safe by having, there was some scientific study that was just put out and then was seen as being false. So you're falsifying how dangerous this is. So that can't be used, which is a prerequisite for then having an emergency use authorized drug. And you can't have an emergency use authorized drug if there are other treatments available that could potentially work. So you're preventing people from the early prevention, then from having drugs that could potentially work. Then you're forcing them to get a shot, which is dangerous. And we have from the VAERS data, I think at least 35,000 that have died in VAERS, and VAERS being the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, which is actually run by the CDC, but that's heavily undercounted. So how many deaths are you responsible for, Anthony Fauci? And then you bring up these stats, and every step of the way in which the early treatments were dismissed, the other drugs were dismissed, where the effects of the vaccine were kind of dismissed or put under the table, where we had 100% effectiveness, where you're not going to pass it, you're not going to get it. The number of grandpas who had to die alone from everyone else, the number of jobs lost, it's insanity.
Health effect right there.
And I mean, we can talk about all the statistics, but I have stories. I have personal stories, and I know people do out there as well. The listeners have those stories as well. Our neighbor, when we were over in Oxnard, they literally, his wife, she was 35 years old. She was perfectly healthy. She got the 2 doses of the vaccine, and she gets blood clot, and she dies in her sleep. Her husband finds her right by his side. I have a person in the Navy. She got the vaccine. She got a cyst in her spine, and now she has Epstein-Barr. She's completely disabled now. I mean, we have Carolina. I mean, there's so many stories of people with faces, with actual lives that have been completely destroyed. And I think that we just need to remember, and to also get impassioned enough to say something about it. And that's why I do wish during that hearing that they brought up more practical data and things that were going to just ring him in, because he has been a part of such the worst operation and misuse.
Needed Nuremberg 2.0.
That's right. Do you think it will happen?
I'm not super hopeful, but that's something that I'm going to continue to fight for. So like we said, our hope's in Jesus Christ, but we're going to continue to fight for the right thing. If we don't have that happen, it's not going to be very long until something like this happens again, because we've already moved past it, which is very unfortunate. So I think we try to work with the politicians who are more likely to support us, to let them know that it's a priority, to educate the American people, and to get kind of a movement going ourselves, because it's going to be us. It's supposed to be a government of, by, for the people. So we need to take that initiative right now. Like anyone who's listening to that podcast, there are things that you can do. You can pray. You can see how is God asking you to get more involved politically, sharing that information with your friends. Not everyone's going to be running for Congress or actually in office, but everyone can be more involved, and they can work on their spiritual life as well to have a better understanding of how they can get that.
And voting, please vote.
Yeah. You just answered my final question for you. If the average American citizen can do one thing this week to combat the corruption that we see in our country, what would it be?
That's funny. This week, Virginia is voting their primary. So vote if you're in Virginia.
Yes.
But definitely, the first priority is definitely your relationship with the Lord. That's the thing that has energized me, motivated me, and kept me strong the entire time. So Jesus is first, right? And the next would definitely be to find the local person that you can support. everywhere there is need, and there's good fighters that require you to go out there, maybe host your home. And one lady I knew, she's like, I don't know how to help in politics, but I can open up my house for a person or give a meal. That's great. We just need to communicate as a team if you care about this country and for your children.
Take it really basic and like register to vote.
Some people haven't done that.
Use DuckDuckGo, not Google, but DuckDuckGo, and find out who your federal and local, like state representatives are, and get to know them, and then just get involved in every primary and every general election. And that way you can, the reason why we suck right now on the Hill is because we just have people who suck, and people are not involved in their primaries. And there's a lot of people who should get primaried, but they have the backing of just this elite few from the lobbyists, from these different super PACs and things like that. And that's where you have a minority of people with a lot of power. They're able to use their money and influence to further their particular agenda at the expense of the ordinary citizen who's not paying attention. Ultimately, who wins is the one who gets the most votes. So if you get involved and you help them get most votes, that's going to help overcome the power that these elites have with all of their money and influence.
Wow. Any final thoughts?
I would say definitely militaryaccountability.com. You can find the DMA there. And then my Twitter, my Instagram, Involuntary Veterans. And then.
Yeah, if you want to follow us, you want to follow me, first follow Jesus Christ. Afterwards, if you want to follow us on social media, my social media is Johnny_Franks. I'm on X and on Instagram.
You're very, very active in social media.
He's much better than me.
I don't know. That's not a compliment. That's a bad thing. Definitely get off your phone too. That's the thing you can do as well. I'm telling myself. Yeah.
Yeah, we all need to hear that. All right. Thank you so much for coming in. It's finally we get to meet in person.
Yes.
This has been great.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe to, and share our podcasts. Visit our website where you can sign up for our latest newsletters and become a member of Feds for Freedom at fedsforfreedom.org.